welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EM World Live. I'm your host, Jessica, and this week we have an Emmy award-winning Jason Cordova with us. Jason, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I am delighted to have you because we're going to be talking about Brindlewood Bay, this excellent game, and digging into that. So that's the topic today. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to jump in the chat and ask, and I'll be there in the comments with links and answers for you. But before we dig into that, Jason, I am a very nosy person. I'm interested in you and your background and your history. So the first question I'm going to ask you is if you remember your first experience with role-playing games. Do you remember the first game that you played?
I do, yeah. The very first role-playing game I played was the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game. From back in the 80s. It was the advanced boxed set version. And what had happened was my dad, I was like 10 years old at the time, so I was pretty young. My dad would take me to this comic book shop all the time to look at comic books, and I saw this game there, and I knew it was a game of some sort, but I didn't have any idea what kind of game it was, but I convinced him to buy it for me. And I probably spent 2 months reading the books, having no idea what I was doing. Like I had no conception of it. I didn't know what Dungeons and Dragons was. I had no context. And so I did not understand what this was, but I was fascinated by it, but I didn't know what was going on. But an older kid came over, and this older kid knew what role-playing games were, taught me how to play it, and ran the game for me like 1v1. And I actually I really distinctly remember this like moment where my character, I was playing a villain and I was breaking into a jewelry store or something.
Of course.
Yeah. And I remember this kid who was running the game. He kind of describes the jewelry store and everything. And then he goes, "What do you do?" And I was like, "What do you mean? What do I do? Like, do I do something with this paper, or like, I don't know, like he's like, what do you mean? What do I do?" And he's like, "Just tell me what you do." And it took me a minute to grok what he was saying, but I eventually did. And I was like, "Oh, this is for me. Like, this is for me. This is what I want to do. Like I want to do this for the rest of my life. Like, I love this." Like, just, it felt so open with possibility, So that was my first role-playing game. And I kind of pretty swiftly moved on to second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. That was probably the main game I played for most of my youth. And, but also I played things like Rifts and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Shadowrun. And I'm aging myself a bit here. Vampire, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Amazing. So it sounded like you had a really kind of well-rounded TTRPG diet, so you were trying loads of different stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it was really exciting. It was a different time, pre-internet. So a lot of times you just had to like kind of pick something up and try it. Like there was no one to like tell you, or there was no easy way of finding out like whether something was good or not. So you just and we didn't really have any basis for comparing either. And when you're young, just cool art and guns and powers is like enough, right? To like make you excited about something, right? So
it's got a Marvel superhero theme. It's Teenage Mutant Heroes.
Yeah. Like Rifts mechanically probably one of the worst games ever written, but like at the time it was like so exciting, like, like, oh my gosh. And nowadays it doesn't really fly for lots of different reasons, but I took a break from role-playing games and like basically for all of the aughts and early 2010s so I missed like 3.0 and 3.5 and 4. I missed all those editions of Dungeons and Dragons. And I came back in 2013, kind of lured back by the indie RPG scene.
Yeah. Amazing. So how did you become somebody that was like, playing games, coming back to playing a lot of indie games, to be somebody that created a game that has done very, very well, Emmy award winning? And if I'm correct, Brindlewood Bay is the first game that you wrote.
It is. Yeah.
How did that come about?
Yeah, it's the first game I finished, I should say. It's probably more accurate.
Okay.
It kind of depends on where you measure it, I suppose. But so I actually my journey to publishing was I kind of started in community organizing and game organizing. So like I mentioned, I came back in 2013 to the hobby, and I was just looking for people to play role-playing games with. And so I found this somewhat defunct group in Houston. It was just a Google Plus board called The Gauntlet. and they weren't really doing anything, but it was in Houston, which is where I was. And so I was like, hey, I'm interested in playing something that's not Pathfinder, because that was the big game at the time. Is anyone interested in trying out these other games, And I was, at that time it was like Fiasco and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And so somebody replied, and we kind of got a thing going. We would meet every Friday night every Friday night in a closed down office park building that we had access to, with no AC in Houston. We would do that, and then Friday night became Fridays and Sundays, and that became Fridays, Sundays, and Wednesdays. And so we had this really regular face-to-face group that just grew and grew in Houston, and eventually we began to rival the size of the Pathfinder groups. We would have 6 or 7 tables at our Wednesday meetup. And so I was kind of doing that a lot. And then when I moved away from Houston, in order to kind of keep that going, I moved the Gauntlet to be just an entirely online thing. That led to podcasting, and so I've hosted several podcasts through the Gauntlet over the years. And then eventually we got into publishing as a way of supporting our broader community initiatives, financially. And I published smaller games and smaller things from other people. And then my own first game that I published was Brindlewood Bay, though it was not the first game. I had started writing another game called The Between, which is also now out, about monster hunters in Victorian era London. And I had been working on The Between for a while, and I was running into this issue with the mystery system. I didn't know exactly how I wanted the mystery investigating part of The Between to work. And rather than rewrite The Between over and over again, I decided to do a smaller mystery game just to try out some of the basic concepts that I was playing around with. And so that's where Brindlewood Bay came from. I don't remember how I got the original idea for it, but Murder, She Wrote meets Cthulhu seemed like a pretty slam dunk idea. and so yeah. It's a pretty good hook. And so I started working on that, and I put Brindlewood Bay out, because it was originally just kind of a sketch for The Between, but it ended up being its own game, and it's it's a big hit, and we're really excited about it. And The Between is very popular now too, and so it's really interesting because the two games are very much in some sense, I worked on them at the same time, but Brindlewood Bay did come out first, but they also are in communication with each other. Brindlewood Bay informs The Between informs Brindlewood Bay, and back and forth. And so, that's kind of how that's the short version, but
yeah, no, it sounds like an interesting,
believe it or not, that was the short version.
no, that's great. For people that haven't heard of Brindlewood Bay, because we're talking about it because we know about it, could you give a brief overview? So if somebody's hearing about it for the first time, what is Brindlewood Bay?
Brindlewood Bay is a tabletop role-playing game about a group of elderly women in a fictional town in New England called Brindlewood Bay. These women, they all have partners who are deceased, and they've sort of moved to Brindlewood Bay as their kind of late in life second act, essentially. And they find friendship and companionship in one another. They all share they all have a shared love of murder mystery books, and so they have a murder mystery book club that they go to every week, called the Murder Mavens. And so they are called the Murder Mavens, and they eventually start helping the local authorities solve actual murders taking place in their little town of Brindlewood Bay. Perfect. And as the campaign progresses, they also learn that these murders are all happening because they are part of a grand occult conspiracy. And that's where the sort of Lovecraftian aspects of the game come into play. And so it's a game that sort of starts as a sort of cozy murder mystery thing, but then it transitions into this kind of more darker horror focused thing at the end. And and at the end they have to confront this cult in order to save their community. So yeah.
Amazing. Absolutely love it. So with the game, obviously we talked a lot about the inspiration is, like you say, Murder, She Wrote and things like that. So I think those themes come through really clearly, and a bit of Cthulhu kind of thrown in there for the murder. Of course, why not? But talking about system and your inspirations for that, so you chose kind of a Powered by the Apocalypse sort of base for it. Of course, there's edits and tweaks. What made you think that system would work really well for this story?
Well, it was mostly just a matter of familiarity, if I'm being honest. I mean, there's a universe where I played some other system more and maybe bolted my
Yeah.
mystery ideas onto that, but PBTA
Yeah.
is what my community is really good at. It's what we're known for. We did a lot to sort of promote Powered by the Apocalypse as a forum, and so it was just something that, as in the Gauntlet, we were very, very familiar with, and I was personally very familiar with, because my favorite games are, Monster Hearts,
Sure, yeah.
Monster of the Week, like games like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that was mainly the reason why it has a Powered by the Apocalypse kind of foundation.
Sure.
But I do like it. I mean, I think Powered by the
Mm-hmm.
Apocalypse is a good fit for the sort of cinematic and genre focused style of play that I prefer, and that indeed Brindlewood Bay is. And so, yeah, but then it has its own kind of elements, particularly the mystery solving part of it, which is somewhat novel and different from what you find in PBTA, and also the fact that it's scenario based, right? Most PBTA games don't have scenarios, right? So
yeah. So talking a little bit about, we'll dive into the mechanics as we go, but maybe it'd be useful to talk about the characters, the people that you play in this game. So as you say, you're going to be playing these elderly women, or elderly people maybe, that are part of this mystery club. But how do we actually create a character? What mechanically goes into it?
There's only a few choices to make. So I see you have
like that.
If you're watching the stream, you have the little sheet pulled up here, and basically you pick your name. We have a selection of names there for you, but you can write your own name, of course. You pick your style, which is both an expression of your personal fashion sense as a murder maven, but also it should say something about your personality as well. And we have some of the styles are very like the meaning is not immediately clear, and that's intentional. I intend for you to research them more. Like what does it mean for your style to be Martha's Vineyard or Dorothy Spornak or Blouse Farm? Like, what does that mean, right? And so, and you can bring your own meaning to it as well. Every maven has a cozy activity, which is a hobby they enjoy outside of murder mystery books. So baking, pottery, knitting, etc. You have your abilities, which is a 5-score array, and you pick some questions that are called end of session questions that you are trying to role play towards, so that you get experience points at the end of the game. That's the only way you get experience points, is by answering these questions positively or affirmatively. And then you pick a move, and the moves, there are 2 different sets of moves. There are the classic Murder Maven moves, and then there's the new set that we kickstarted, or part of the Kickstarter, one of the Kickstarter stretch goals. The classic moves are all inspired specifically by male TV detectives. So your Fox Mulders, your Dale Cooper, Sonny Crockett.
Poirot. Yeah.
Well, Poirot's in the other set, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
These are TV American TV detectives, we'll say.
Oh, okay, right, okay.
And men. That was a really intentional decision that they're all men, because it's a little bit of a joke on my part of like, in a lot of these old shows in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, like women were sort of like accessories in the story, Yeah. So here in my game, the men are the accessories. They're the abilities that the women use to.
Nice.
To do
I love
thing,
that. So women aren't just standing there going, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Because if you've seen any woman in a crisis, look at me. What
exactly
do we do? Yeah.
But yeah, that's actually a really interesting. That's actually not a bad segue. Well, let me talk about the other set of moves real quick. There's another set of Maven moves. You can basically play the game in 2 modes. The other mode uses Maven moves inspired by classic detectives from literature. So there's your Poirot, your Mr. Marple, and all those types of characters, Sherlock Holmes. And the move set in the new move set, the literature ones, they're a little bit more meta in a sense, and they're a little bit more like role play forward, I think, than the classic moves. Both are a lot of fun, but it's basically 2 modes of play essentially. But speaking of like women though, and like how women are represented, that was actually a really big part of the design goal for me. On the surface, the game is very like, cuddly and cozy. And it's about these like older women, and they wear cardigans and they solve murder mysteries. And it's very, it's very Rosemary and Thyme. It's very Miss Marple. It's very all that. Right. But also I really would like for the game to kind of, I don't know, like frankly and unapologetically explore like what it means for these characters to be women. Right. And so one aspect of the character sheet is called the Crown of the Queen and the Crown of the Void. And what they are essentially is they're just a little series of prompts. There's about, I don't know, 10 total or something like that. And when you're rolling dice, in order to get a better die result, you can mark a Crown of the Queen or a Crown of the Void in order to get a better die result, and you just have to do what it says. And the Crown of the Queen all has prompts that explore the idea of the characters as women. And so like it's a really like kind of particular kind of narrative focus that has nothing to do with murder mysteries and nothing to do with Cthulhu mythos or Lovecraftian cosmic horror. It's really just like narrate a flashback to a time when you were an imperfect sister or daughter, right? Like that kind of thing. Or narrate a scene in the present day showing how you find, like intimacy or satisfaction, right? Like it's that kind of thing, right? And then the other part of it is the Crown of the Void, and those have more to do with like the Maven getting more wrapped up in the occult aspects of the story. But yeah, that was a really big part of the design for me. I did not want these characters to be caricatures.
Yeah, definitely. I think that comes through. And I think it's really nice to have a game not only focusing on women, but older women as well, because typically in society, older women are kind of invisible, and we don't look at them and talk about them, and but they're interesting for people with stuff going on and are involved in the occult, and I think we should
right, we should honor that, right? I mean like when I was running this by my aunts and my grandmother, and my mom, and kind of talking to them about and in some sense they were kind of like consulting with me on this but like talking with them and just kind of knowing their experiences and their life experiences, I mean, you don't stop being a full person just because you're in your 60s or 70s, like you keep having desires and wishes and aspirations, and this whole story, I mean, is about a group of women who basically, because their partners are deceased, they are deciding late in life, like, this is my second act or my third act, maybe, like this is like my new, I'm, in my twilight years, I'm going to like live life to the fullest with this group of other women. And I don't know, it's very Golden Girls in that way as well.
Yeah.
So,
No, I think that's very true. I think that is true for a lot of women when, their partners pass away, they're in this new stage of life and they're like, wow, I get to recreate a different kind of life for myself. And,
well, because women typically live a lot longer than men, right? Especially if their partners were men, right? I mean, and these characters or partners don't have to have been men, but but typically it's, it's a woman outliving her husband by a long time, and so, I think it's an interesting territory. And like you said, it's not something we get in media much less role-playing games, right?
It's great to see it. And I think it's really interesting playing these characters as well, because generally I think older women care less about what other people think about them. So they will say what they want a bit more, or they will have whatever hobbies or dress however they want. And so I think the style and the cozy activities are really nice kind of nods to that, about people just enjoying what they enjoy and living their life.
Or they will assert themselves in the middle of a murder mystery and say, like, what were you doing on this day or that day, or what was going on, So,
exactly. So speaking about that, let's talk about the mystery system in the game. So tell us about the mystery system.
This is the part of the game that I think some people are like really skeptical of until they try it. I think once they try it, they're usually convinced. But the idea, so we have the game is scenario based. The core game comes with 6 mysteries, 6 murder mysteries. And then we have another book, a supplementary book called Nephews in Peril, which has like 30 more mysteries that you can use in your game. And the thing about these scenarios, though, these mysteries, is there are not canonical solutions. So the classic starter mystery, Dad Overboard, which most groups will play, it will always have a different solution than like the next time you play it, right? And that's because the keeper, which is what we call the GM in this game, the keeper has no idea who did it. They have a list of suspects, they have a list of locations, they have a list of clues that they can kind of sprinkle throughout, but they don't know who did it. And the characters can investigate however they want to. They can search wherever they want to. They can do online research. They can go poking around offices or yachts or whatever they want to do. They can talk to people. And as the keeper, your job is to simply assess the moment, take a look at your clue list if they find a clue, if they roll dice and are entitled to a clue, and work that clue into the moment, right? And so it's all about like there's no wrong way to investigate, for one thing.
Sure.
And you can always find the clues. But the fun part of it, the part that makes it feel like you're actually solving a mystery, is when you have enough clues, as a play group, you then get together and you look at all the clues you've got and you start building a theory of the case. And you start saying, okay, well, based off everything that's happened in the story so far, based off these clues we have, based off all the information we've got, this is who we think did it. And this is why. And then you're going to roll some dice. And depending on how many clues you're able to work into your theory, you get a certain, bonus on the die roll to see if you're correct or not. And you can either be correct and you can then go bring the killer to justice. You can be correct, but bringing the killer to justice will be difficult or complicated in some way. Or maybe you're wrong and the person you thought was the killer gets killed themselves and completely throws all of your planning out the window, right? And so that's kind of the thrust of the mystery system. It's this emergent collaborative thing rather than one person at the table knowing the answer.
So very much designed to encourage collaborative storytelling. So
yes.
So if people have come from, perhaps they've been playing a lot of like D&D 5e, which can be less collaborative than that. Do you have any kind of guidance or advice for people running this style of game? And
Yeah. The thing is, I think it's not as hard as you might think. I happen to believe that role-playing games as a medium are, there are a lot of advantages that we don't have compared to other forms of entertainment, right? Video games have lots of interactive elements and visuals, and movies have, actors and visuals and all that kind of thing. In terms of mystery books, like an actual mystery book, we have this like really particular forced perspective that, is an advantage that we don't have in a role-playing game. And, but the one thing that role-playing games do really well is collaborative storytelling, right? That's the one thing we can do in our form of entertainment that no other form of entertainment can do. And so what I find is that the mystery system, this collaborative storytelling, it's not just like collaborating on the mysteries. You're also invited as a player to build out the scenes, to describe locations. There's lots of opportunities for you to give input to the keeper about what things look like and sound like. This is not as hard as you might think, because really, truly, I think that all people or most people are natural storytellers. It's something we've been doing as a species for a really long time, and we're pretty good at it as a result. And so I find that it's not so difficult, just because the typical GM player relationship is a little more one-sided, because that's the way it's been sort of historically. It doesn't mean that's the way it has to be. It can certainly be this more like sitting around a campfire telling each other a story, which again, I think is something as humans we're pretty good at doing. So trust the rules, do what the rules say, and you should be able to get it done and have a good time.
For me, because I'm this year new to like running games, so this style of collaborative storytelling takes the pressure off me. I feel running games, because I don't have to hold everything in my head and have the story. I can just turn to the players and be like, what's there? What do you think? And they'll come up with something better than I ever would.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And someone else will and just that classic kind of thing. So running this kind of game, I feel, is almost less intimidating than approaching a more traditional kind of crunchy role-playing game with all this stuff you have to remember, because you can just sit and tell stories, like you say, with other people. And
and this game just happens to have a light mechanical overlay to make it all kind of go in a particular direction, but otherwise it's pretty I don't want to say freeform. There are certainly games that are much more freeform than mine, but but like For the Queen or something like that, but also very fun but different. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I think the thing I really, really love that I had never, I don't know if other role-playing game writers experience this, but I certainly did a lot, and it makes me very happy, is the number of people who wrote me messages and still write me messages saying that Brindlewood Bay is the first game they've ever run. Like, I've never GM'd a game before, and and Brindlewood Bay was the first one because I felt comfortable doing it, and it was great. And that makes me really happy, like that they were having like this really good kind of different first experience. Yeah, and I mean, we try to support that as much as we can. I mean, the Kickstarter edition of the book has a really, really robust keeper support section.
Mhm.
And then I do videos on YouTube showing how more games are run so that people can see it in action. And so we try to be as supportive as we can as far as that goes. But I think you're right. Yeah, there's just a basic sort of like, in my mind, I agree. I think the crunchier
Mhm.
games are actually harder
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, even though
Yeah.
they seem like they have more structure and more things going
Mhm.
on. That can be a lot to manage,
Mhm.
and it can actually kind of get in the way a little bit of just like conversation, you know.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, with talking about Brindlewood Bay, like a lot of people are running it for the first time as a one shot, and I
Mhm.
think the structure of it lends itself really well to one shot sessions, like going to conventions or just trying
Yeah.
out running a game.
Mm.
How is the game different if you're running it as a campaign, or are there any slightly different ways you'd approach it if you're planning on doing a short campaign using it?
Yeah, I mean, well, we wrote it to be a campaign, so all of the
Hmm.
guidance in the book assumes you are running a full,
Hmm.
12 to 15 session go of it,
Hmm.
which is about how long it takes to do the full. We call it the Dark Conspiracy campaign. Like to do that full
Hmm.
campaign takes about 12-ish, 13 sessions, something like that,
Hmm.
which is about 6 mysteries plus the final confrontation with the cult. That
Hmm.
said, you're right. It does scale nicely to a convention setting and a one shot setting because it's scenario based, right? So you can
Hmm.
sort of like just pick the one and go with it. I do think the one thing that's kind of worth being mindful of, whether you're running it in a one shot or whether you're going to run it in a short series or whether you're doing it in a campaign, is the pacing of the supernatural elements. Um,
Yeah.
in a one shot, you are not obviously not going to have a lot of space to really get into the dark occult conspiracy aspects of the story, and that's kind of okay.
Hmm.
I think you can sort of like hint at it and let it kind of rest in the background and kind of be an intriguing thing that players maybe think about, but otherwise you're just
Hmm.
focused on the mystery that you're solving, and that's perfectly
Sure.
fine. Um, but obviously, as you get ready to like add sessions, you will start you'll start introducing more and more of these supernatural elements, and the game helps you
Hmm.
with that. So the
Hmm.
game has this sort of timer, which is called void clues. So there's like
Hmm.
special clues you can find called void clues,
Yeah.
and whenever you introduce a void clue as the keeper, you're just showing a little bit of this sort of creepy supernatural elements
Hmm.
peeking, kind of creeping into the world, peeking into the world, showing, sometimes it's in the background, sometimes it's just a weird little odd thing, but it's there. But those void clues are also a timer for the overall campaign. So you have this
Hmm.
campaign sheet called the Dark Conspiracy sheet. And essentially, as the Mavens find X number of void clues, they unlock the next part of the campaign, which changes the nature of the campaign, introduces new
Hmm.
elements and things like that. So it's pretty structured, and there's a lot of guidance
Hmm.
there, but it's still fairly easy to manage and keep it, you know, it's still fairly light load as far as managing a campaign, I find.
Hmm.
And so we tried to like strike a nice balance between being very supportive of the things keepers will need to keep going in a campaign, while
Hmm.
still leaving them lots of space to
Yeah.
improvise and incorporate what the play group is doing. So
Yeah. And I guess the void clues probably also help with that tone shift that will come, because I'm
indeed,
imagining
yes,
that when you first start playing this game, you'll be playing, it could start off quite humorous and quite
yeah,
light-hearted with the
yeah,
characters, meeting for their club and doing all
yeah.
this, and
Yeah.
and then by the end it's
Then a
it's a
void clue
different
happens.
tone.
Yeah, yeah. You're
Yeah.
like, whoa,
So
yeah,
I can
yeah.
imagine that naturally lets you bring in that change of tone and kind of pace it that way.
Well, and indeed, the structure of the game is such
Hmm.
that basically after the first session of play, according to the campaign sheet, after you've done your debrief, after we think we're all done
Hmm.
with the game that day, the keeper then narrates a little sort of MCU style stinger, right? Where they
All right.
they
Okay.
narrate like they show an out of character scene showing the cult doing some dark stuff in the background, right? And so that's the real like the hook, right? It's like, I mean,
Hmm.
the players might have been excited about playing this game already and they had a great first session, but then that
Hmm.
little stinger scene with the cult, who are called the midwives of the fragrant void, that little stinger scene with the
Yeah.
midwives absolutely hooks them in. They're like, oh, I have to come back and see what is really going on here. So
Hmm.
that's that it's all built in, right? Like that, like structurally, that part of it, we've tried to make it so that the keeper can really just focus on like the scenario in the moment, and as long as they're following the structure, they'll kind of naturally unfurl those supernatural elements
Hmm.
uh without having to like think about it too much or too hard. They
Yeah.
kind of just kind of go with the flow and follow the structure, and it works out pretty well, I find.
That's really reassuring to hear the system helps with that, because I think a lot of people running a game for the first time, things they worry about is how do I get the pacing right and how do I get the
Mhm.
tone shifts
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the fact that the game has support built in for that is a little bit comforting. Well, definitely for me anyway.
Yeah, well, and
Um,
the thing is, like, our design and our publishing instincts all come from the fact that before we were a publishing group, the Gauntlet was a play group. That's what we
yeah.
did, right? We at our height, we were organizing like literally like 200 sessions a month, right? Like online
Wow.
and face to face. And so as a community, we have like so much experience with play. And I
Mhm.
think that sort of collective information and knowledge and institutional knowledge and
Mhm.
knowledge about what works at the table has
Yeah.
certainly filtered into our games, right? So like we have
Yeah.
a really good sense of like what works at the table. And so and
Mhm.
it's reassuring when people then say, yes, this worked at the table. So
Yes.
we
Yeah,
had a
yeah,
good
yeah.
experience with it. So it's like, hey, great, glad to hear that.
That's the goal, yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of play experience, I can picture
Mhm.
in person how this you have all your clues, and I can
Mhm.
imagine when you're theorizing, you're literally on the table putting stuff together and doing things
No,
like
no.
that. How that would obviously be a bit different with online play. What kind of plans do you have for the game for
Yeah.
virtual tabletops and online play?
So we're mostly an online play community, and
Hmm.
we have commissioned Roll20 to make some Roll20 assets. That was part of the Kickstarter that we did. Roll20 is working on that. We
Hmm.
don't have a lot of direct involvement in that,
Hmm.
but my understanding is that the eventual product, the Roll20 product, is going to have like a murder board kind of like
Hmm.
idea, and we have sent them the many hundreds of pieces of artwork of characters and things for them to like
Hmm.
incorporate into the Roll20 product. And so that's a thing that's underway. In the meantime, or alternatively, in the Gauntlet, we don't use anything like that in our online games. We just use
Hmm.
what's called a character keeper.
Hmm.
This is a concept that we invented a number of years ago, where you basically use a Google Sheet to a shared Google Sheet as a highly formatted for each game, um, to kind of track all your information. And so we
Okay.
use that, and it's pretty effective. And um, I'm excited about the Roll20 product, but I'm really
Hmm.
accustomed to our Google Sheets, and so I'll probably just keep
Sure.
using the Google Sheets myself. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so you can, I mean, the Brindlewood Bay character keeper, who was created by Ben Bond, is excellent, and like it's functional and usable and available now, and people can go play right away. It's how we play in the Gauntlet every single day. But the Roll20 product is coming. I know some people have made things for some of the other VTTs. Those are not like official things, but we
Uh-huh.
certainly sanction them. We're okay with that.
Hmm.
But the official thing is coming from, oh, there's also a Roll
Okay.
VTT implementation as well, which is pretty good. But the Roll20 one is the one that we're really excited about. But we just don't know when it's coming out yet. I mean, Roll20, they have their, we're in their queue, so hopefully it'll
Yeah.
be done
Yeah.
at some point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, that's great to hear. So if people, kind of want to find out more, if they've listened to it and thought, you know what, sold, I'm going to pick up a copy. Where's the best place for people to go?
So unfortunately, you can no longer pre-order the hard copies. However, we have printed loads of extra physical copies of both Brindlewood Bay
Amazing.
and the supplement Nephews in Peril. You will be
Mhm.
able to purchase those from our partners at Studio 2 Publishing.
Mhm.
So we'll eventually have that purchase link somewhere on our website.
Mhm.
For now, though, and you can get the PDFs on DriveThruRPG, and we have PDFs of there's Brindlewood Bay, there's Nephews in Peril, and they're terrific. But if you do want to wait and you want to pick up the physical book from Studio 2, we do a PDF thing, where a brick and mortar type thing, where as long as you just send us a receipt, we'll send you the PDF as well. So
Oh,
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Fab. Excellent to hear. Well, thank you so much for coming on and
Oh, thanks
sharing
for having me.
Brindlewood
Yeah.
Bay with us. It's been a really great time. Before you go, I do ask everybody if they have any recommendations for other TTRPGs, and the rules are
Yeah,
it can't be D&D because this is not D&D, and it can't be a game that you've made because we spent a little bit of time talking about your
indeed.
game.
No, fair enough. I always like to, I have a deep well of knowledge of indie RPGs, and so I like to pick
Mhm.
something a little bit outside the box whenever I can
Yeah,
recommend it.
please do.
I love the games of Matthias Holter. Matthias
Mhm.
Holter is mostly known for LARP, for Nordic LARP,
Mhm.
but he did a number of really fantastic indie tabletop games in the like in the 2010s, and one of them that I'm going to recommend is called The Society of Dreamers. The Society of Dreamers, hugely influential on my game, The Between, and I just love it. But basically, you play this group of people who are in a sort of Victorian era-esque setting. You play this group of people who have become aware of these dream creatures called Nemesites. And what they do is they get together to study the Nemesites. And sometimes that means literally diving into the dreams of people who are being terrorized by Nemesites to make contact with the Nemesites, right? What I love this game, though, the premise is great, but what I love about it is it's a game that uses like rituals of play in a really intriguing way. So at the very beginning of the game, before you even start playing, you stand up and you walk to the four corners of the room and you like yell gibberish into the corners in order to quote unquote like cast out the spirits, you know, in the room. You light candles to play. You have this like each little gameplay phase has its own like little sub game mechanic that you're dealing with, and so one of them is kind of like a Ouija board thing. One is this really fun process where you're diving into a dreamer's mind, and you, as the person diving into the dream, you narrate what you're seeing in this dreamer's dream, but the other players control you. They like tell you like what to do, and so I don't know, it's just got so many fun little rituals of play. And it's a great game to play if you're just looking for something kind of spooky and you want to do something kind of a little bit different and outside the norm. It's great fun.
Definitely. And definitely seen that Nordic LARP influence come in by a lot of things you said there. So,
it's
gonna be dark, it's gonna be scary, let's sit in a room and cry for a few hours style.
It's kind of I mean, Society of Dreamers is pretty close to a LARP. I mean, it's in some sense it's a LARP because you're sitting around a table messing around with Ouija boards and stuff like that. But but you can definitely see the LARP influence for sure.
Yeah, well, that's a great recommendation. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And again, thank you for coming on and sharing your game with us and giving up your time. Would love to have you back on in the future because I know there's so many other great games that you have coming in the future and are already out now. So I'd love to have you back to talk about them in the future. But for now, that's all this week. And thanks very much to everyone who watched or listened. Bye.